is to get away from this idea of dieting, right? And now I know we hear terms like, what does your diet consist of? What kind of diet do you follow? And that can mean different things. Sometimes it's simply the composition of the things you eat day to day. And that's not exactly what we're getting at here. I'm talking about like these, diets, like when you go on a diet for the purpose of losing weight, right? And there's a number of reasons I really hate that term, and I don't like and don't recommend going on a diet. So a few of these reasons. Number one, it automatically puts you in a mindset of lack and restriction or punishment. So it leads to the forbidden fruit trap. You may have heard of this before. And the idea is that you're restricting yourself from certain things for a certain amount of time, and then you, for whatever reason, you allow yourself to have that thing or some of those things or whatever for a period of time, or in a single instance, let's say. But then you go overboard and you end up binging on that thing, or you just overindulge. Sometimes this can be a cheat day. Sometimes it can just be a cheat meal. Other times it can turn into days or weeks. Because the next thing that happens is that we end up going completely off the rails, again, because of this punishment thing that is sort of implicit in dieting. So then, like, whenever you have that indulgence and you overdo it, because it's this forbidden fruit that you don't ever allow yourself to have because you're on a diet, then that kicks in this guilt and shame, right? So now you're feeling crappy because, oh, I went off my diet. I failed. I messed up, and it's all over now, and I might as well forget it, and I've blown it, and then we end up giving up. That's kind of the progression that can happen. The second thing about dieting, most diets are overly restrictive, making them unsustainable. And if something is unsustainable, it's pretty hard to make a healthy lifestyle from it. It's hard to maintain and sustain something that you find miserable, that leaves you feeling hungry, it leaves you feeling deprived, whatever it is. And there are hundreds of different diets out there, as I'm sure you're well aware, and they all claim to be the best thing and the most effective, and they all have empirical evidence behind them. If you really look into it, there's empirical evidence for low carb dieting, there's empirical evidence for intermittent fasting, there's empirical evidence for low fat dieting, calorie counting, everything, you name it. There's probably some study somewhere that you can find that supports, the results, the effect of the diet. And I just gave you a number of examples of these different types of diets, right? So we've all heard of these like different kinds of diets, and there's lots of extremes and other variations out there aside from, the more commonly known ones here. But the problem is, the con to these is that they require very strict adherence, and they backfire quickly when you slip or slack on them. And this is inevitable because most of the time these diets create this extreme deficit that is very difficult to maintain, or other types of restrictions. Now, the worst example from this list, in my personal experience, is low carb. I would never recommend that diet to anyone under any circumstances. It is just, it's quick. You will get results fast, but the second you start trying to eat like fruit, you blow up. I'm not even kidding. I experienced that firsthand, and I've experienced the other repercussions of a lot of these other diets firsthand as well, but nothing backfired on me as quickly and as drastically as low carb. When I finally, and somehow I willed myself to do low carb for 4 years. But I finally cracked. I finally got to where I couldn't stand it anymore, and that was the result. So obviously I'm not a fan of these really restrictive diets, because again, I don't think they're sustainable long term. And if it's not sustainable long term, there's a risk of backfire. There's a risk of gaining the weight back. The third reason is that there's often an implied finite time frame for diet. So most of us will go into a diet with a focus on how much weight we want to lose and how quickly we want to lose it, which is how we kind of get into the trap with these other diets, because a lot of them will, offer fast results, and many of them will deliver on that. But the problem is that the results you get really quickly, you also lose the results pretty quickly when you go off of the diet. So that's one of the issues I have with them. And then the long-term sustainability is not usually, it's just usually an afterthought if it's thought of at all. Again, because we're coming into it with focus on, I want to lose weight. I can do this for 3 months. I can stick to this for 3 months and get the weight off. And then it, as if you just don't have to continue to maintain these efforts after the 3 month mark when you've reached your goal weight theoretically, right? And that's not true. If you want to maintain the results you achieve, you have to maintain whatever you did to get them. So that's another reason I'm not really a big fan of the concept of dieting, because it's not a short-term thing. It's a lifestyle, and you have to be able to maintain and sustain it for life. So keeping that in mind, it's important to select something, whatever you end up choosing for yourself, that you believe you can follow for the rest of your life. If you want to maintain your results and your overall fitness and all of that. So over the course of 30 years, I've tried all the things, all the diets, you name it, I've done it, including supplements and fat burning pills and all the stuff. I've experienced everything that I just mentioned firsthand in terms of things backfiring, the forbidden fruit trap, this mentality of like, oh, I'll lose the weight in 3 weeks and then like it'll all be great and I won't have to do anything anymore. So all of that stuff. And I've gained it back faster every time, and I have found it even harder to lose the weight again with every different thing I tried. And the shortest answer I can give you for why this happens is hormones, right? If I just put it in a single word, that is the word I would give you. Obviously, it's more nuanced and there's more to it than that. But the bottom line is that doing these extreme deficit types of eating approaches, it basically messes with your hormones. All the hormones that are involved in your metabolism, in fat burning, and in appetite, they get out of whack. And then other hormones in your body will become more resistant to releasing body fat down the line. It will slow metabolism and all those sort of things happen. So in the long run, it just kind of compounds with every time that you try a different thing and you stick with it for a while, you get some results, and then you go back to maybe not being on the diet or whatever. So again, these are all things that I've experienced firsthand, and having tried all the different things, I can tell you there are 2 eating approaches that have stood out to me over the years that have withstood the test of time, in my opinion, in my experience, that I continue to use to this day, because they are the most effective and they're sustainable long term. And you're going to get balanced nutrition with them. So you're going to also feel better. You're not going to be feeling like you're starving all the time doing these approaches. And so those 2 approaches are whole food, intuitive, clean eating, and macro tracking. Now, the reason that I have chosen these 2, these are the 2 I recommend, is first, they both involve a balanced diet that includes the 3 macronutrients that our bodies need to function. And those are protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Your body needs all 3 of these things, period. End of sentence, end of story. Number 2, both of these approaches are flexible and they allow for a variety of foods, so that you're not really restricted. There's lots of flexibility, and there's ways to still enjoy things that you're eating, and getting a balanced diet, good nutrition, all of that. And then the third reason is that you can still enjoy many of the things that you love. And there's even room for, some of these occasional indulgences and such, so that, again, you're not feeling like you can't ever have a piece of chocolate cake again in your life, or whatever it might be for you. There's ways to do that without derailing your progress and without like gaining weight, like a lot of us might think will happen when we have these foods that we've deemed as bad. When really it comes down to consistency and eating an overall balanced diet consistently over time. So over the past 8 years, this has been what has enabled me to stay on track and sustain a healthy lifestyle with regard to the nutrition component of everything. So let's get into these eating approaches.